first verse of that hymn that we just sung is based on this chapter, and I wanted to turn here to, once again, having earlier tried to expand our minds a little to see the wonderful world that God has made around us, but to turn to this wonderful chapter for this reason, really, that in the work that I do, we sometimes carry fragile instruments around to measure things, and they're in the back of the car sometimes. They're knocked around a little bit. They're pushed around, carried on trolleys, they're moved around. And so they get bumped and they get knocked and they need recalibrating. It's like setting your watch back to the correct time. And I think Isaiah chapter 40 is doing that for us. It's recalibrating us. It's bringing us back to the right time. It's bringing us back to the place we should be. So, if you would follow along with me, we'll read the whole of the chapter just to see where we should be and to get in our minds again where we should be thinking, what we should be doing. So here, Isaiah chapter 40, our recalibration. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice of one calling, in the desert, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God. Every valley will be raised up and every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level and rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed. And all mankind together will see it, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. A voice says, cry out. And I said, what shall I cry? All men are like grass, and all their glory is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers, and the flowers fall, because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, and the flowers fall, but the word of our God stands forever. You who bring good tidings to Zion, go up on a high mountain. You who bring good tidings to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up. Do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and his arm rules for him. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand has marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Who has understood the mind of the Lord, or instructed him as his counselor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him, and who taught him the right way? Who was it that taught him knowledge, or showed him the path of understanding? Surely the nations are like a drop in a bucket. They are regarded as dust on the scales. He weighs the islands as though they were fine dust. Lebanon is not sufficient for altar fires, nor its animals enough for burnt offerings. Before him, all the nations are as nothing. They are regarded by him as worthless and less than nothing. To whom then will you compare God? What image will you compare him to? As for an idol, a craftsman casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold and fashions silver chains for it. A man too poor to present such an offering selects wood that will not rot. He looks for a skilled craftsman to set up an idol that will not topple. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and his people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. He brings princes to naught and reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground than he blows on them, and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. To whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? Who brings out the starry host one by one and calls them each by name? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and complain, O Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord. My cause is disregarded by my God. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Amen. Let's think about those words just for a few minutes together to see the scope of this, to let the reverberations of what we've been singing touch us as well and remain with us as we look at these words together. I just have three things. It seems traditional to talk about three things, so I'll have three things to tell you of the way in which these words should cause us to come again to see our God and to wonder at him, to behold our God. The first thing I want to say is that this passage reminds us of the exuberance, God's exuberance in creation. In our world, we know more than people have known about the natural world ever before. We have so many programs, so many magazines, so many books to tell us about the natural world. And yet I think that we have lost the wonder and the awe that we should have, the amazement at the world that God has made, that we've been in some ways robbed of the preciousness of the world that we live in. It almost seems as though because we've said, oh, this works like this and this does that, and that's been, adapted to live there, and all those kind of things have robbed us from really realizing that God made that just as it is. And it's a wonder. It should be a wonder to us. So we're going to look really to reclaim that lost ground. Let's lift our eyes up. Let's look around us and see what God has done. Let's look for the artist's signature Let's look for the sculptor's fingerprint. Let's look for the goldsmith's hallmark and say, this is our God's work. Let's remove the shackles. Let's remove the blinkers. There's a poem that I think sort of starts to describe some of these things, and it goes like this. Look at the tree line and the grassy knoll, the tumbling, tinkling brook, the flash and whir of wings upstream, absorbing grandeur with just a look. Remove the cover that blinds me, cut the rope that binds me, and let me see you in it all. Distant stars shining through frosty air, moon shadows cast upon the ground, an unseen owl's ghostly call, then settled silence all around. Remove the cover that blinds me, cut the rope that binds me, and let me hear your voice in it all. So I want us to begin again to appreciate the beauty and the grandeur and to rediscover in ourselves that desire to create, to explore, to wonder, to seek, to discover the world. But why did I say God's exuberance? In a way, God could have created a small world, maybe just the earth, with the sun to keep it warm and do all the other things the sun does. But he didn't. As he spoke the words to create, all the vastness of space went out there, because God is God. And when he speaks a word, things happen. And all this vastness of space that we only really just touched on with our thoughts earlier came about. God's exuberance in what he has made. Some of this is here in these verses in Isaiah. Verse 12 talks about who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens. Starting to see the vastness of what God has done, the greatness of what God has done. Verse 22 says he stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent. If you in any way could have conceived those distances that we talked about earlier, to see that how God stretched them out, spreads them out like a tent, look at them all around and wonder again when you look at the night sky of what our God has done and created. And in verse 26, we're encouraged to do this. Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls them each by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. We're encouraged in here to look at the starry sky and to wonder again, who made this? Our God, who we were just singing about. You just stood and sung about our God. Let's get amazed with him again. Let's become taken up with our God, that when we suffer the knocks and the bangs of this world, we come together and we recalibrate. We set ourselves together and we say, no, this is our God. It talks about the intricacy of nature. If you think about it for a moment and look at the wonder that keeps this world together, the variation in this world. For instance, assume you have a blank canvas. You're going to make a world. There's nothing in it. Have you got the imagination to plant it up with flowers? Let's just stay with that one. That's a hard one in itself. When you think of the variation, I think I'll have plants this high, this high, this high. Well, there's far more. There's some this high, there's some in there, there's some taller. Okay, then I think about the colour. What kind of colours, what kind of palette will I use to create this world? I have these colours. I'll have a bit of green, but I'll have a bit of this and a bit of... And then you see the wonder of the different shades of green. And then you see all the other colours coming into play. Wow. Okay? That's not all, though. What about the shape? Well, I'll have this shape, and then I'll have a few that shape, and I'll have a few that shape. And then you start to, if you look at any of the catalogues of flowers and any of the encyclopedias of flower, you see there's a vast array of shapes. So are you beginning to get your mind stretched a little to wonder at this, that could I have done this blank canvas? No, I couldn't, of this world, just this world. Then, what about scent? What about the smell? What about the touch? What does it feel like? And all of these things are with our God who has created this world, the variety that is there, God's exuberance in what he has put before us. Let's reclaim this ground. Let's reclaim the world around us and look at it and wonder. And he did it by speaking a word. God's exuberance. The second thing that I think is in here, and I just want us to talk about, is God's extraordinary redemption. Now, it's not all in here. That's why I got Steve to read from John chapter 1. But this chapter talks about comforting his people, right there in the first verse of this. And it talks about dealing with sin. Did you see that? Doesn't miss it. Paying for sin. Paid for. Interesting that Isaiah uses that phrase. And then I want you to see that this great God, he comes. Verse 9 talks about him coming. Here is your God. And verse 10 says, see, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and his arm rules. See his reward. And you might see all of that. John chapter 1 helped us to begin to see this. But before you start to think, that great God, if I've got any concept of it, he's out there beyond me. So verse 11, it goes on to verse 11, from the Lord coming to verse 11. I think verse 11 is such a lovely, comforting, astonishing verse. It says, he tends his flock like a shepherd. This great God, Isaiah says he tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms. He carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those who have young. This God is an amazing God with this extraordinary redemption that he brings about in the work that he does. And it's because he is a caring, loving God who wants to comfort his people. You need to meditate on verse 11 if you've had the knocks and the struggles of this world, and to see that he carries us close to his heart. That's astonishing in itself. And then he talks about in the closing verses of this chapter about that God sees. There's a complaint that maybe my way is hidden from God. He doesn't see me. My cause is disregarded by my God. And he says, God sees. God hears. God renews. You can see those closing verses of here of God renewing his people. This is an extraordinary work of God to come this near to us when he's made the vastness of the space all around us. But he didn't do it with a word. That's the thing we have to see here. And that's why we read John chapter 1. To redeem mankind called for something even more wonderful, even more powerful than God speaking a word and creating all that is around us. It was far more costly. Steve read for us, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." And it said, "To all who received him, all who received the Word, the Lord Jesus, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." God is not aloof. He's not disinterested or unconcerned. Maybe you've seen the news. Maybe you're concerned about all the things that are being put out there at the moment through the media. That we need to come back. We need to reset our watches. We need to review our concept of our God. God's exuberance from a word spoken, God's extraordinary redemption from a life given. We're just going to conclude by talking about a God exalted far above all. Now this text encourages us to make comparisons with our God. It's there. First of all, the comparisons of who is measured in verse 12. In verse 13, who has understood? And then in verse 18 it says, "To whom then would you compare God? To who will you compare me? Who is my equal?" Says the Holy One. And that's again copied in verse 25. "To whom will you compare me?" Or "Who is my equal?" says the Holy One. So through this, what comparisons will you make? And we always try and exalt ourselves. So men's glory, we're quite something, but verses 6 to 8 pull the rug from under us. We think we're something, we wither and fade like the grass. This comparison is made there. We think, well, we're beginning to understand things. We're beginning to have great wisdom and intelligence. And then verses 13 to 17 show how small, how insignificant compared to the mind of God we are. And then we can be very exalting of how strong we are, how mighty, or we are overcome by people who show how great they are, how mighty they are, how strong they are. We see some people with authority. It talks about the princes here, but those who are in leading governments, those who are leading armies, those who are ruling this world, as we see it. We can think there's a lot of power in all of this. And yet verses 21 to 24 talk about all of those that are boastful, those that are strong, those are powerful and with authority, and God brings them to naught. We should not fear them. We should not see them as the answer to our greatest needs in our lives, but to see that our God is exalted far above them all. And in fact, our God, as you can see here laid out in these verses, is incomparable. The comparisons are made, but he's incomparable. So Isaiah helps us to see this is our God, Creator, Redeemer, incomparable. So let's worship him. Let's adore him. Not just now, we're going to sing our closing hymn and we'll use that to exalt our God. But let's take this word away with us. Let's take Isaiah 40 with us so that as we suffer the sorrows and the troubles of life, we come back and we look up and we say, "How great thou art." That's going to be our closing hymn. It's going to come up on the screen here. O Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made. Let's stand as we hear the music together to sing this. Thank you.